out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan. Hope everyone is having a nice holiday week. It's Black Friday, by the way, which means on GamecockScoop.com right now, you can get 75% off your first year of an annual subscription if you use the code RIVALS24. So go to GamecockScoop.com, try to click on a premium article or something, and it'll take you to a sign-in screen, or you could just hit sign up in the top right corner and use that code RIVALS24 to get a full year for 75% off. Really good deal. It's the biggest deal of the year every year. So definitely take advantage of that. All right. We are going to talk Clemson. There's a pretty big game happening in about 24 hours. 24 hours.
Almost exactly 24 hours.
So before we get started, I have a quick quiz for you. Two of them are fact-based and one is your opinion. So I'll start with the fact ones. How many teams has Clemson beaten this season with a winning record currently?
Well, I know they lost to Georgia and Louisville. It's two of the teams with a winning record. They beat Pitt. I think it's just one. Is it just Pitt?
That's the only one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So I think I wanted to start with that one because later on we're going to talk about some of the gaudy numbers the Clemson offense has put up. They're scoring 37 points per game. There's been several games where Cade Klubnik has thrown for over 300 yards. But I think all of that has to have that caveat that they haven't seen very many defenses like South Carolina's. They really haven't seen a defense like this since Georgia, I would argue, which obviously didn't go too well. And then Pitt was probably Pitt or Louisville, probably the second best defense they've played so far. And they split those games and had a real chance to lose both of them. So just kind of keep that in mind as we do break down this game. Obviously, you got to throw the record books out because it's rivalry week or whatever cliche we want to use there. But I do think it's really interesting just how weak that schedule has been. All right, another fill in the blank. Cade Klubnik, it's along the same lines. Cade Klubnik was sacked blank number of times against Pitt 2 weeks ago.
I watched some of that game. I didn't watch the whole game. I'm going to say 4.
You would be far too low. He got sacked 9 times. Sorry. My bad.
Really?
He got sacked 9 times between Pitt and Virginia Tech. So back-to-back games there. I actually don't.
How many in the Pitt game?
That is a great question that I wish I knew off the top of my head. I just saw the fact somewhere and forgot to read Virginia Tech.
Maybe it is 4.
Pitt, Clemson, football. Let's look that up. While I'm looking that up, the last one is more of an opinion-based question, but where would you rank Clemson in terms of difficulty on South Carolina's schedule? Like what number team of difficulty? Are they the 4th most difficult team, 5th most difficult team? You get a...
That is a good question. Obviously, it's the most difficult of the non-con games. Trying to think. I think Clemson's probably better than Vandy, definitely better than Kentucky, better than Oklahoma. I think they're better than LSU because LSU's. Well, there's a Brent Venables conversation to be had there. Maybe. I'm gonna put Clemson. Oh man, 4th maybe. I don't think they're as good as Alabama, Ole Miss, or A&M. I think that's fair, and they're probably a little better than Missouri. Yeah, I think they're a little better than Missouri, but I'm gonna say 4th. I think that feels about right.
Yeah, I'd probably put them 5th or 6th. I think Mizzou could beat them, and I think you could make the argument for LSU as well. By the way, 5 sacks versus Pitt, which means there were 4 sacks versus Virginia Tech. And as we're thinking about that fact, you should also think about the fact that Kyle Kennard is 2 sacks away from breaking Jadeveon Clowney's single-season record.
And he said in media this week that to learn about the rivalry, he watched Clowney's games against Clemson. That's a real thing he said.
And Dylan Stewart is 2 sacks away from breaking Clowney's freshman sack record. So could be pretty cool if both could happen at the same time. That would mean four sacks between the
At
two
least
of them.
4 sacks, yeah.
Or I guess like you could get 3.5 because I think they're both like 1.5 sacks off the record, something like that. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about this. So tomorrow they're traveling up to Clemson. We've agreed that South Carolina, you said they're about the 4th most difficult team. And I think the 3 other teams that you mentioned are teams that South Carolina lost to. Well, no, who
They beat A&M.
A&M on that list. So how are you seeing the matchups sort of start to stack up in this one? And what do you think we can expect?
I think the more I look at this, we talked about some of the kind of the base level stuff on Monday, some of the matchups, what Clemson likes to do, what Clemson's good at. I knew Clemson was good in the turnover department. I don't think I realized how good they've been. And yeah, some of that's luck, some of that's bounce of the ball. I understand, but I think turnovers are such a big part of what South Carolina does on defense and what Clemson avoids on offense. They've got 7 all season. They've lost 2 fumbles all year. Cade Klubnik's thrown 4 picks on 366 pass attempts, and then they're back at quarterback through 1 pick in a garbage time situation. So I think down to down, just the general football 150 plays, whatever's in a football game usually. I think you feel okay about this. I think South Carolina's probably better than Clemson down to down, but Clemson's been so good at forcing turnovers and not turning the ball over themselves that I think that's kind of the equalizer here, that South Carolina's got to protect the ball. And even if you don't win the turnover battle, you can't lose it. You got to find a way to keep that even. And if you do, I think you have a pretty good chance here.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm looking back through it. One of those interceptions was against Georgia. So obviously we know how that one turned out. Louisville, they had still 0 interceptions and 0 fumbles, but also Louisville didn't either. That was just a weird sort of game statistically. And then Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago, which was the close win, they did lose, or no, they lost a fumble, but they forced 2 turnovers on Pittsburgh. So I do think that that's always something to.
They're undefeated when they win the turnover battle this year. I know that.
Yeah, definitely something to look out for, especially on the road, especially with a team in South Carolina that has had some trouble with both turnovers and penalties throughout the year, although definitely cleaned that up a lot more lately, even though Lenore Sellers did throw a pick last week. And I will say, as much as the turnover battle is always an important thing, South Carolina's defense has been pretty good in those recovery situations outside of
the
Ole Miss.
Sudden change stuff. Yeah.
Well, I think Ole Miss scored 2 touchdowns on turnovers, but other than that, it's either been a field goal or nothing pretty much all season. So, I think if you lose the turnover battle by 1 or whatever, you still could have a path to victory, but certainly would rather not. Defensively, I already mentioned it, but I think South Carolina is probably the best defense that Clemson has seen, at least since Georgia. And I mentioned that they have that 37 points per game, but let me read off a couple of outliers there that have kind of pushed that up. They scored 66 against App State. They scored 59 against NC State. They scored 40 against Stanford, 48 against Virginia, 49 against Wake Forest. And then in their more competitive games, you're looking at 21 in a loss against Louisville, 24 in a close win over Pittsburgh, and then 3 against Georgia. So it is a high points per game, but I did want to kind of point out who those opponents were in those high points per game. Also, 3 weeks ago, 24 in a close win against Virginia Tech. So pretty much when they've played a reasonable defense, it hasn't been quite as gaudy.
Yeah, this game feels like it's going to be in the 20s, right? At least to me. Like I feel like that's about where this goes.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I mean, unless we do have some crazy turnover luck or
Sure.
something like that, if both
That
teams
also
play,
does bring up another point, though. And here's my question for you, quiz wise. You talk about crazy plays. How many kicks has Clemson had blocked this year? Do you know the number?
I knew that we're having a problem with it. I don't know the exact number, but if I'm going to guess, I'll call it 5,
8.
8. Jeez.
6 field goals and 2 extra points, including one last week against the Citadel.
Yeah.
So that's not a problem. I mean, they're by far the worst in the country at that. I think there's only one other team in FBS with more than 5 was a number I saw when I was looking at it this week. So can you make a play on special teams in this game? Can you block a field goal? Can you block an extra point even? That could be big. Clemson's clearly had a significant problem with that this year. It's one of those things you don't necessarily expect to happen, but it's happened so many times to Clemson that you can't not mention it. It is at least part of this, I think.
Yeah, no, and obviously South Carolina likes to pride themselves on their special teams play. Maybe it hasn't been quite up to the Pete Limbo level at this point this season, but I think that they're still dangerous, and I think if they can find something on film that those other teams have been able to exploit, they're certainly going to come after them.
Yeah. Shout out Lembo, by the way, 8-4 year one at Buffalo.
That's good stuff. Obviously, South Carolina had their own struggles on special teams last week. So we talked about it a little bit in our Wofford review, but yeah, fake punt, fake field goal that would have been a touchdown gets called back. Did they muff a punt? Did I forget this? Did South Carolina muff a punt?
Sort of. It hit one of the up man's shins, like when he was running down, and it clipped a Carolina guy and a Wofford guy fell on it. It wasn't a true punt return or dropped it thing, but technically, yes, that's a muff punt in the book.
Yeah, and still something that you have to, that's a mental thing, right? You have to get away from the ball. So can't have any slip ups like that in addition to the turnovers. And then I kind of briefly mentioned it. I think you need to play a pretty clean game penalty wise. Having said all that, I feel like I'm crazy and definitely let's take this with a grain of salt that it's rivalry week, and you've won one of the last 8 against Clemson, 7 against Clemson. I feel like South Carolina, if both teams play straight up and play pretty mistake free or whatever, I feel like South Carolina is the better team. That's the feeling I have right now.
I don't think that's crazy.
So I don't know. 2 years ago, right? South Carolina does get their one win, those 7 that I mentioned. And it felt like everything kind of had to go right. Felt like you were pulling some rabbits out of the hat here and there. And obviously you end up winning it on a muff punt, which we just mentioned. This year doesn't feel like that to me. In fact, I would be a little disappointed if I saw South Carolina coming out and pressing and feeling like they need to go for it on 4th and 1 on their own 30, like they did against Ole Miss, or pulling all these crazy trick plays out of the hat or anything like that. To me, if you line up toe to toe, I don't see why there's any reason why you don't feel like you can win this game.
No, I'm with you completely. It's kind of why I brought up the turnovers first, because I think that's the best path for Clemson to steal a possession or two. And it's crazy to talk about Clemson needing to steal a possession, things like that. But yeah, I think you feel better about your defense. I mean, Clemson's got a very good defense too, but I think you feel better about your defense against pretty much anybody you'll face the way it's been playing. I think you feel Klubnik's playing really well, and I wrote about the quarterback battle this week, and I actually think there's a lot of similarities between Sellers and Klubnik, just in kind of their trajectories and how they've both gotten better as the year's gone on. But I think Sellers is playing better right now. If you can I don't even want to say stop the run, because I think Phil Maffa is going to get his yards. I think it's kind of the yards aren't points thing that Maffa can run as much as he wants between the ones. If he finishes this game with 20 carries for 120 yards but no touchdowns, I think you could live with that.
Yeah, I agree. Did you see what Kiffin said about Clemson this week?
I did not.
So apparently during his weekly radio show, he referenced Clemson's schedule and said he lumped them in with other teams. He didn't just say Clemson directly, but he said Clemson and teams like them that are right there on the edge of the playoff would be 500 in the SEC.
I don't know if he's right, but I also don't know if he's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we broke down how they would stack into South Carolina's schedule. If they're in that 4th or 5th slot, I mean, they're probably only slightly over 500 or so if they played the same teams. Who knows, though? We could look really dumb if South Carolina goes in there and gets blown out or something tomorrow. Bigger picture, where do you have some more? Oh, actually, I have one more question. I know that injuries are going to play a pretty big role in this game. What can you tell us on the injury report, both on the South Carolina or Clemson side?
Jared Brown is going to be good to go. That's a big one to get back. It sounds like the tight ends are still questionable, and that doesn't usually mean good things when Beamer says guys are questionable. Hasn't said much on Simon or Smith this week. I think maybe they play. I don't want to rule them out, but I think maybe they play, but they're not. I definitely don't think either one will be 100%, but I also think they both really want to give this a go. So I do think you're going to have to find some ways to get creative. I think you're going to see more of that 10 personnel, that kind of thing. As for Clemson, it sounds like they're maybe trending in the right direction, but they did lose an offensive lineman, one of their depth guys, towards ACL last week against Citadel. Wade Woodaz is still questionable. I think their second leading tackler behind Barrett Carter. So that's one to keep an eye on in warm-ups tomorrow. It sounds like they've had a lot of injuries where maybe it's not starters, but it's a lot of guys that are kind of fringe depth. A couple offensive line, I think 3 offensive linemen who are kind of rotational are all going to be hurt. So it's one of those things that maybe you don't look at that as a big deal, but the more the game wears on, it might be.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how those offensive linemen end up playing for Clemson. I know they're getting, I can't remember which name it was, and maybe you just mentioned it, but they're getting someone back that they had lost earlier in the season, but they lost the backup last week. So it's kind of a weird shuffle around where you have maybe your starter from the beginning of the year sliding back in, but the person that's played for most of the season is going to be out. Now, maybe you're still better off that way, but I do think gelling and all of that on the offensive line is pretty important. So it'd be interesting to see how that goes.
Should we talk a little playoff?
Yeah, one more thing though. Even if Clemson's offensive line was fully healthy, I think, which they were in the Georgia game at the beginning of the year, I think it's tough to project them being able to hold up consistently against South Carolina's defensive front. But one big question here is going to be how Cade Klubnik can use his legs to extend plays and perhaps pick up some rushing yards himself. I've seen some people suggest that the South Carolina should put a full-time spy on him. What do you think about that?
I don't hate that. I think Klubnik's been a lot more dangerous with his legs than people think. I do think there's more to worry about in the Clemson passing game than years past, just because these receivers. I think the narrative for Clemson, basically since like DeAndre Hopkins left, was like, okay, or maybe like a Hunter Renfrow too, but like, okay, Dabo's a wide receivers guy. Why are there no great receivers here? Well, Antonio Williams had a big year. Brian Wesco's had a big year. I think there's more on the perimeter for Clemson than maybe in years past, but I still think Klubnik's kind of where this begins and ends. And maybe Demetri Snyder, whoever is a spy, is probably a good idea.
Yeah, I don't know if you need it on every single play, but certainly on some of those like third and medium situations where I think he could be in a run pass sort of option situation. And I don't mean an RPO, even though that is what that stands for. I just mean like rolling out or whatever, and then maybe ducks it. Let's talk playoff a little bit. So since we last spoke, the playoff rankings came out on Tuesday. I can break down the whole rankings for you here in just a second, just in case you didn't see that. But the real headline for South Carolina is that they are 15th, and they got slotted in behind Ole Miss and Alabama, who are at 14 and 13 respectively. And then your opponent this week, Clemson, are at 12. It's also, I know it's a 12-team playoff, but important to note that Clemson is the first team out currently because of the way the at-larges and everything play out. But you would think Clemson beating the number 15 team puts them in really good position. Also, we'll talk about it in a second. They still have a chance to get in with an auto bid from the ACC. And then I guess my first question to you is what you think South Carolina beating the number 12 team in Clemson would do for their resume. Would it be enough to jump Alabama and Ole Miss, who, of course, have the same record and both beat South Carolina head to head?
Yeah, I've kind of two minds in this. I know we talked about this a little bit Tuesday when the rankings came out, and you had a different take than me, and I'm starting to come around to yours. My original take was that I just don't know how you make up the head-to-heads. You can do a lot. You could go score 100 points tomorrow at Clemson. You can do whatever. You can't change the fact that you lost to Ole Miss and lost to Alabama. I just don't know what you do about that. But your point, and I think I am starting to come to your side of this, is that Clemson being at number 12 means the committee values them really high. Clemson is ahead of all of the non-SEC two-loss teams right now. So, in theory, if you go on the road, beat the team the committee clearly values a lot, maybe you can make a jump over Alabama and Ole Miss. Obviously, you would jump Clemson in that scenario. Maybe you can make a jump there, get yourself to 12, maybe 11, and then at that point, you're going to need some other breaks, I think. But I don't know. I think we talked about this before we got on here. I don't think it's realistic to expect a 2-9 Mississippi State team to win an Egg Bowl today as a 30-point underdog or whatever. But you need Ole Miss to wobble, maybe. You need that to be like a 7-point game at halftime, something like that. I think Auburn's got a shot tomorrow in the Iron Bowl. They're playing for bowl eligibility. They're playing their best ball of the year right now. Alabama's kind of reeling, but you need Auburn to at least keep that close, I think. And then, like you said earlier, Vanderbilt over Tennessee is the one you really could use. That's a noon game tomorrow, so same time as South Carolina. Southern Cal beating Notre Dame at 3:30 would help you. Georgia's in the SEC championship, so they're kind of have a shot either way, even if they lose tonight. But their at-large chance would certainly go away if they lost to Georgia Tech tonight. I don't know. What do you think?
Go ahead, also, I think with the Georgia thing, if they lost another game, the best win on Alabama and Ole Miss's resume is Georgia.
Yep. Good point.
So that might hurt that a little bit.
I didn't even think of that, but you're right. Yeah.
So let's kind of look at who's ahead of South Carolina in the SEC right now. Texas is at number 3. They have a big game with Texas A&M. They've had a pretty weak schedule, but I tend to think even if they lose, they're probably in as an at-large. At 10-1, that would put them at 10-2. And probably if you're South Carolina, you're rooting for Texas to
I don't think there's any question.
Because you want to keep Texas A&M out of the picture. Although there's the argument to be made that Texas A&M is South Carolina's best win. So does that hurt if they keep losing? Right. That's true. That's true.
And the other side of that too is right now you need to make sure that there's no bid thieves. And the winner of that game in College Station goes to the SEC title games. So you'd have a 3-loss A&M playing a win and in game next week, where they could jump you even with the 3 losses in the head-to-head.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think you definitely need Texas to win.
So you have Texas in, you have Georgia in right now, and like we said, probably in either way. Well, if they lost to Georgia Tech and then lost in the SEC championship game, they could get knocked out. But if they win this week and lose in the SEC championship game, it'd still probably be hard to keep them out as the second place SEC team. Tennessee is a big one at 8. They play Vandy tomorrow at Vandy. And you really need to hope for upset. Vandy's certainly not going to catch them off guard because that's already a bit of a rivalry game. Vandy has obviously beaten some pretty big names earlier in the year. And that I think they'll have Tennessee's full attention. But, Diego Pavia's probably last collegiate game. I don't think he's going to win his lawsuit or whatever. So, maybe you get something extra special from him. And then you have a few non-SEC teams between. And then, like I said, Alabama at 13, Ole Miss at 14. So right now you have 3. You only have 3. Am I wrong? No. Texas,
no, that's 3,
Georgia, Tennessee. Right now you only have 3 SEC teams in the playoff. I have a really hard time believing that holds. I think you'll probably get a fourth. You need some things to happen, but I think you'll probably get a fourth. And if you get a fourth, South Carolina just really has to make an argument that they are that fourth team. I think a fifth SEC team would require a whole lot of chaos right now. So things you're probably rooting for this weekend if you're trying to get a fourth SEC team in, which is the first criteria, and then you've got to somehow jump Alabama, Ole Miss. You need Miami to lose at Syracuse tomorrow. I think that's definitely doable. That's a tough place to play. And the reason for that is right now you have both Miami and SMU in the top 10 of the rankings. Miami at 6, SMU at 9. So that means whoever loses the ACC championship game, as long as it's reasonably close, will probably still have an argument for making it in as an at-large. The downside, if Miami loses, if you're a South Carolina fan, is that puts Clemson in the ACC championship game, which gives them an opportunity to earn an auto win with a win over SMU. But again, if you beat Clemson, then you potentially beat the ACC champion that is also in the playoff. So maybe that helps your resume overall when it comes to jumping in Alabama and Ole Miss, and it knocks Miami out of that top 10. So you have an extra spot for an SEC team. So I do think that there is a path there, even if it sounds a little gross if you're a South Carolina fan. Another thing to look for, I think, is Indiana at 10. They're playing Purdue. It's going to be really tough for them to beat Purdue. I mean, for Purdue to beat them, they're probably in no matter what, but the fact that they're ranked so low is a little intriguing to me. They asked the college football playoff chair after the ranking show the other day, like how much they're factoring in record over whether or not the team looks better or not. And he pretty much said, like, we go off of which team we think is the best team. If that's truly true, Indiana's got like one of the worst strengths of schedule in the whole country.
Yeah, playing a team that's winless and FBS play this year is not going to help that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they're probably in if they finish 11-1, but obviously they won't get a conference championship game. I mean, they could if Ohio State were to somehow lose to Michigan.
I don't think they can because they're down the tiebreaker to Ohio State.
It would have to be Ohio State loses and Penn State loses or something.
Okay,
like
Penn State's playing Maryland. Yeah, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, so anyway, that'll be interesting. But I think your best path is the one I laid out a second ago through the ACC. You maybe have a backdoor path with USC beating Notre Dame, drop them to 2 losses.
I don't think that's crazy. I think Notre Dame's pretty good. They've blown out most teams they played this year, but it's on the road. It's the cross-country trip thing we always talk about. Southern Cal had a nice win last week to get bowl eligible. Notre Dame's only favored by 7. That's not impossible.
No, I just wonder if Notre Dame's in, even if they lose, especially if they lose.
I don't think so. I mean, they would only have 2 losses, but no conference, and one of those 2 would be to Northern Illinois.
Yeah, I think the problem.
I think they'd be out if they lost.
Notre Dame's Notre Dame, but we'll have to see. But yeah, so if you're watching football today, you are cheering for Mississippi State and Georgia Tech to at least cause a little bit of a ruckus. It could be interesting if Oregon State beat Boise State. That doesn't really clear up a spot per se.
There still has to be a G5 somewhere. So you're just putting a different G5 team in that spot over you.
Well, what could happen, is it shuffles things around to the point that the Big 12's back in. Well, I mean, they're in right now, but Tulane's right there on the outside.
Lost last night.
Tulane lost last night. Yeah, so they're probably in no matter what at this point, actually.
Yeah.
I'm just spitballing out loud. Big 12's probably in. So what would happen? Boise State would probably still be in with 2 losses?
It's the highest ranked conference champion. So if I think Boise's already in the Mountain West Championship, so I don't think there's another G5. Maybe Army. They only have 1 loss. So it's Notre Dame if they won the American. Is there a Sun Belt team this year I don't think so. I think no one in the Sun Belt's ranked right now, right?
And UNLV is playing Boise in that championship game, right?
Right. So it'd be like maybe UNLV if they beat Boise next week.
Yeah.
But either way, that's not a spot available to South Carolina.
Right.
Because it has to be a G5. So
Yeah. So that ACC path that I laid out is probably your best path, or Notre Dame losing. But in general, you're rooting for chaos and let the chips fall where they may. And of course, you
Yep.
have to win against Clemson. I think a 10+ point win would do you some favors for sure. But I think a win at all probably
I
gives
think,
you a little boost.
yeah, this is a week to run up the score because, South Carolina needs an excuse to do that to Clemson anyway. You have a score prediction? I mean, mine's going on the website probably soon. It's scheduled already, but what do you think?
I've been following South Carolina football for a long, long time. So I know that this game can go either way. Pretty much no matter who is favored and who has the better team and all those sorts of things. It being Clemson is not my favorite, but it's a noon game, so I think that does nullify that a little bit. I'm going to pick South Carolina to win. I think it's going to happen. I think that they win by something like 8 points. So let's call it 28-20.
I'm feeling closer than that. I'm honestly feeling the 1 point thing again from 2 years ago. I said 24-23 South Carolina, maybe a block kick in there, a blocked extra point or something makes a difference because Clemson doesn't seem to know how to protect the kick right now.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable path for sure. South Carolina wins this game if fill in the blank.
Even in the turnover battle, and Lenore Sellers does what he's done for the last month.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm going to say I'm going to just add a couple keys. South Carolina ends up with 5+ sacks and a turnover.
Okay.
On
are you splitting those at least 2 each for Kennard and Stewart so they both get their records?
I think it'd be tough for both of them to get their records, although that would be awesome.
Stewart will have a chance in a bowl game or a playoff game. I think Kennard would probably opt out of a bowl game if it wasn't a playoff. But
yeah, I think I'm going to say Kennard gets 2 and breaks Connie's record, though. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. We will be back here on Sunday to break down everything that happened. Obviously, we have a lot going on GamecockScoop.com right now. Like I said, take advantage of that Black Friday deal. It's Rivals 24 at checkout. Obviously, this week is a really fun week to join, but also we have the portal opening up soon. We have the early signing period for recruiting. By the way, quick recruiting note this weekend, Donovan Murph is going to be there. I still like where South Carolina stands, but I think South Carolina or Clemson has put themselves in a pretty good second place position. So, does whatever game result happens here kind of tilt the scale one way or another? I don't know, but definitely something to look out for. We got basketball getting ramped up, which we didn't talk a ton about, but both the women and men had pretty important wins yesterday.
For people who are worried about the women after a loss, they played a top 15 team yesterday, gave up the first basket of the game, first possession, whatever, and then scored 32 points unanswered.
Yeah, and I watched the men's game on Wednesday night. Virginia Tech is not a great team, but they're all right. They're probably North Florida level, which you lost at the beginning of the season. And one thing I was kind of impressed with with South Carolina was they pretty much controlled the game throughout, but there was a moment where Virginia Tech made a run. Lamont Paris called a timeout, and right out of the timeout, Jordan Butler hit a 3, and South Carolina kind of pushed it back to 10 points and never turned back, made their free throws down the stretch. So if anything, I think it's just like the team showing that they know how to finish a game, which is something that they did struggle with in that UNF game at the beginning of the year. So, it's still going to take a little bit of growth to start to knock off Q1 level opponents, but it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. And then you got another Power 5 opportunity in the SEC ACC Challenge at Boston College on, I think it's Tuesday.
Yeah. All right. We will be back on Sunday to break down the game and everything else. Go check out GamecockScoop.com, and we will see you later.